Those tiny shorts? Ball bag always hanging out the side? No.
Eavesdroppin'.
Well, good hello. Good hellos to you, Michelle.
Well, that wasn't quite a good morning or a hello. Good hello.
It was a mixture of all.
Good hello to you.
Hello, Michelle. How are you today?
I'm great. It's sunny outside, hot and beautiful. How are you?
I'm good. Same here. Wherever I am in the world right now, it's pretty nice as well. Having a good time where you are? What are you doing?
I'm exploring Stockholm in sunny Sweden. That's where I am.
Wow.
I'm going to be hanging out with the fam. So
Nice one.
Not my fam.
No, someone else's. Because they're the only ones that'll have you. Listen, Michelle, last week's episode, did you hear anything about it? Did anyone come back at you and say, I had no idea, one, who Armie Hammer was, or two, all the awful things he's been up to?
No, I didn't. It's been radio silence.
silence,
I
guys.
think it's
Come on.
because nobody knew even who he was. I did look him up, though.
Yeah.
I mean, do you know what? He's a pretty good-looking dude. Like, you can see why the ladies love him.
You were desperate to know what he looked like.
He's all right.
He's all right.
Would I go there knowing
No.
that he wants to eat my rib?
No.
Or munch on a toe? Probably not.
Exactly. Let's give him a wide berth. And I'm sure, you know what? I'm pretty sure we'd probably be in his swipe to the left or the right. I don't know which way you go when you don't like the person.
Oh, gosh, it's been so long. I think it's a swipe left if it's a
yes,
no.
I know. Okay.
A swipe right.
So we would be in the bin, basically, you and I. I don't think
Yeah.
we'd get a second glance, really, from Armie. Do you think? No.
Speak for yourself. Look, I think he'd be potentially up for anyone who's
Anyone willing?
to give up a pinky. So, for a snack.
Oh, wow. Listen, Michelle, I've got a shout out today for a lovely man by the name of Marcus.
Okay.
He has started listening. He's a friend of mine from work, and I mentioned that I did a podcast. He was dying to know what it was. I told him, and I thought, that's the last I'll hear of it. Most people just go, oh, yeah, no, I haven't listened yet. No, I'll get round to it. I haven't watched it yet, they sometimes say. And I'm like, well, it's something that you listen to. It's a podcast, like a radio show. But they just kind of can't. Some people just don't quite get the measure of what a podcast is. But Marcus did, and he listened to not one but 4 on the go. He said he just couldn't stop listening.
I love you, Marcus.
Here's a massive shout out to you, Marcus. And please keep listening. The one that he really liked, the one that stuck out for him was the one that we did about feral children. And it's funny because another listener, Karina, a.k.a. Karina Vagina, as I call her, I don't know if I should put that on there, has said the same thing. She was absolutely fascinated by that story that you told about the Ukrainian girl who was raised raised with dogs because she was abandoned by her parents. And she pointed out that she was in the Donbass region. So she now will probably have been moved on into Russia because that's what they're doing with a lot of the people in institutions in the Donbass.
Jesus Christ.
She says.
That's scary. Yeah. Oh, that's really awful.
So I wonder what happened to that girl, Yulia, was it? And what was her name? Do you remember?
Olena. Oh, God.
Oksana.
Oksana. That's right. God, you've got a good memory. You haven't got the old middle-aged menopause memory.
I'm drinking a mushroom coffee right now, Michelle. It's barking up all my synapses. It's hitting all the right spots.
Well, poor old dog girl, because, she might not have
Dog
had
girl, as you'll call her.
have a good fate, unfortunately. Yeah. So I don't have any shout-outs. However, I do have an update on a previous story.
What one?
Anyone who's been eavesdropping on us for a while might remember when we looked at the Lynette Dawson case. That was in one of our Psychic Detective episodes. And I did actually look it up. It was from season 2, episode 20, if you want to go back.
Well done. I tell you what, they can't hit us up for not researching things, can they? Our haters can't hate on the researching techniques. We're very good.
Well, they could probably troll us for any other number of things. But anyway, so for anyone who maybe doesn't remember that episode, we talked about how it was speculated that Lynn Dawson, who was a mother of two girls in Australia in the early 80s, it was speculated that her husband, Chris Dawson, was behind her mysterious disappearance.
They've never found a body.
No. And this whole case has been reignited because of an excellent podcast that we also talked about, an Australian podcast called Teacher's Pet.
Yes.
Which
From The Australian, which is a newspaper in Australia.
Yep. And they uncovered this sex ring and all sorts, but...
Really?
Yeah, don't you remember the PE sex ring?
Oh.
The PE teachers.
Oh, no, of course, the PE, because there were PE teachers and they were all at it with the underage girls. That's right. But what I'm really keen to know about, Michelle, before you go any further, is the thing that really stuck out to me was the fact that Chris Dawson and I think his brother were both players for the Newtown Jets, the football team, back in the 70s and 80s.
Yep.
Now, my family are from that area, and I know it's full of gangsters. And I know that they've got links. The football in particular has links with underbelly crime rings.
You did talk about this very briefly, and I'm just going to actually touch on that a little bit coming up, because what's been happening has been quite explosive, because that podcast has led to Chris Dawson now being up for murder charges, and the trial is happening right now in Australia.
Oh, my God.
So I've been tracking the case a bit, and it's been heating up in like really left field ways. So it's come out, and we knew this, that Chris Dawson was shagging his like troubled 15/16-year-old babysitter, Joanne Curtis, before Lynn went missing. And basically, he'd moved her into the family home as the babysitter. That obviously sparked massive rows between Lynn and Chris.
Of course.
Then Chris took a time out. Don't know if he told Lynn he was taking a time out, but he took a time out from the marriage to go on a road trip with Joanne, the babysitter, in late December in 1981. First week of January 1982, Lynn goes missing. 2 days later, while she's like still AKA missing, and I'm doing like, I don't know why I said AKA, I meant like inverted air quotes.
Finger quotes, is that what you call them?
Air quotes.
No.
What did you think I said?
No, I said finger quotes.
Oh, the finger quotes. Inverted commas. 2 days after Lynn's gone missing, and to put this into perspective, Chris did not report Lynn missing for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
2 days after she's missing, babysitter gets moved in, not as the babysitter, as the girlfriend. And the husband told friends, he thought, the wife's run off with a religious cult. He then tried to sell the family home without her signature. And after, it had been, I think, 18 months, he was legally allowed to marry Joanne, which is all massively upsetting. But it's come to light in the trial that Chris and his twin brother, Paul, they were recorded by the police, had their phones tapped in 1999, and there is a phone recording that was played in court, the gist of which was that Joanne had more to gain from getting rid of Lynn than apparently Chris did, and that Paul, the brother, now remembers a conversation with a conveniently now dead family friend called Elva McBay, who supposedly told him that Lynn had been threatened by Joanne at a birthday party, where apparently Joanne said to Lynette if she got in her way, she'd get rid of her.
She was 16. How on earth can a 16-year-old girl pull off, A, a murder of a grown woman, and 2, disposal of a body that never gets found?
Exactly right. And you know what I'm going to do on this? I'm calling bullshit.
Bullshit.
Bullshit. I don't know if this conversation ever really happened because, the police had reopened a little bit of an investigation in 1999 and they'd interviewed the brothers. So the brothers knew something was going on. And it seemed to me they probably had some kind of idea that their phones were being tapped. And they were essentially trying to throw Joanne under the bus with this story. And like I said, Oh, it supposedly came from the mouth of a woman who now is dead and can't speak for herself. By all accounts, Joanne had, and she was a teenager when she got married, so from about 15, 16 and married at 18.
And I'm pretty sure that pretty quickly the coercive control that Lynn suffered happened to Joanne quite quickly as well.
That is exactly what happened. She had a pretty harrowing married life with him. Like you say, controlling. He was even violent, and apparently he just made her life hell. If you think about it, did Joanne really have more to gain from killing Lynn? You know, didn't Chris hold all the cards at this point? Because
of course
he got the teenage bride. You know, he got the house. He got the life insurance. He got the joint money. He got the family and the young girl. So I just don't buy into that line of inquiry.
The daughters, you mean?
Yeah.
No, me either. I was just trying to imagine running off with my PE teacher when I was 16. I can't think of anything worse. Those tiny shorts, ball bag always hanging out the side. No,
I know.
No thanks.
I know. And look, we had one of those at my school. And I think I had mentioned in the previous episode, he came knocking on my door one Saturday.
That's right.
Yeah. And
it's always the PE teacher.
It is always the PE teacher.
Sorry, PE teachers worldwide. I am sorry to cast the net wide and cast aspersions upon your character. But all I'm saying is there's a couple making bad names for you guys.
And also, we always used to make fun of the fact that they were called a PE teacher because PE was a premature ejaculation. So it's like, whoop, sorry. But anyway, back to this trial. A new witness has come forward saying that he saw Lynn 2 years after she went missing, apparently, and that he reckons she was working in a hospital. Now, Lynn had been a trained nurse. So maybe this is where his memory is connecting this, because there's no evidence to support his claim about this at all.
No.
And he says he was in hospital for a surgery. He wasn't in the best shape when he claims to have seen her. I don't think he was even wearing his glasses. So it doesn't sound very legit. But the wife reckons that when she went to visit the husband in hospital, she also saw Lynn. None of them spoke to her. None of them said, "Oh, Lynn, how you going?" So it wasn't like they had any conversation where they went, oh, it's not Lynn at all. But
she looks a bit like Lynn,
yeah.
I think is what it was probably.
And they contacted the police in 1987 to tell them that they had seen Lynn, because until 1987, no one even had known that she'd gone missing, really.
Right.
Apparently, the police told this couple in 87, oh, it couldn't have been Lynn, she's under the pool.
Oh.
Now, we had spoken a little bit about this back in that episode 20 last season. So to hear more on that, I would suggest go back and listen to that episode.
Yep.
But to go...
It's a fascinating case.
Oh, it really is. And then to go back to what you had said about organised crime.
Yeah.
During the trial, one of Joanne's friends came forward at Chris's trial now. She says... Joanne told her she was going to leave Chris Dawson because the marriage, as we just said, was violent and controlling. And she apparently told a friend, if I don't make it, which I guess if she goes missing or worse, that the friend was to immediately go to the police and tell them that she, Joanne, believed that her husband Chris had Lynn murdered.
Right.
So apparently Joanna told this friend that she and Chris had gone to a pub where Chris had spoken to a man at a pub. It has been speculated that it was the Newtown Jets club, and
Makes
that
sense.
she saw him, Chris Dawson, give this guy an envelope, and that shortly after this, Lynn went missing.
She went missing. Well, this is in the podcast as well. Other witnesses saw him coming out of the clubhouse on those dates, probably, that would have correlated with what
exactly
what's her name said.
And there were two witnesses in this trial that basically gave similar stories against Chris Dawson. So, and you know, this one friend said that Joanne apparently told her that he came out and said to her after this exchange at the pub or the club, that he said to her, I went inside to get a hitman to kill Lynn, but I decided not to do it because innocent people could be killed. So that's the update right now on the Chris Dawson case. So much to think about.
Golly.
Yeah. So I just think
that's a lot.
We need to see how this is going to play out in the coming weeks and months. And this
sure.
could run and run, but yeah, it's super interesting.
Eavesdroppin'.
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 Eavesdroppin'. So, thanks for the update, but what are we actually talking about today? What's our topic? What's our subject? What are we on?
Well, it's funny because we had this theme and I completely forgot it and I went down this whole other road. So sorry about that.
That's all right.
So basically what I'm going to be talking about today is and I'm doing air quotes again.
Finger quotes.
I don't know if it's actually true, origin story of Stranger Things.
Oh, so on trend at the moment, Michelle. Everybody's watching it.
I know, but I actually just had a conversation with my fiance about, he said, what are you talking about? And I said, we're going to be talking about the backstory of Stranger Things. And he went, what's that? So not everybody's watching it. But
he doesn't know who Tom Cruise is either, bless him.
He does.
Right? Didn't he know?
I'm
he
sure
didn't know.
he knows who Tom Cruise
No,
is.
Steven Spielberg.
Oh,
Steven Spielberg.
Did.
That's who he doesn't know.
He just got a bit confused. But look, I have to confess that I loved the first season of Stranger Things. Fell a bit out of love with season 2. And full disclosure, I haven't even watched 3 or 4. So season 4 is what everyone is loving right now. It's just come out. And I know your kids are all over it.
Well, one kid, the other one's terrified. Yeah.
Yeah. So, look, I just thought I would dig into this after I read a little bit about this dark, supernatural kind of story it's meant to be based on. And before we go any further, I just want to say, let's just be clear about this. And let's just call it for what it is. It's a conspiracy theory. So I'm not...
Oh, what you're about to tell us?
Yeah, so because the articles that I read...
Yeah.
It has this kind of feeling of like, it's true, but really, I do feel like it's more a conspiracy theory. So just keep that in mind. But I'm just going to give you a little recap of the Stranger Things plot from season 1 because this will help put into context what I'm about to tell you. So, Stranger Things, it's set in 1983 in Hawkins, Indiana. A young boy called Will Byers goes missing near a secret government lab. The same night Will goes missing, a strange young girl with a shaved head shows up at a local diner. Turns out she's got telekinesis, which means she can move things with her mind.
Like Carrie.
A bit like Carrie, yes, but no buckets of pig's blood. And she's on the run from this evil laboratory. And she claims that the lab's researching supernatural phenomena using kids and that they've unlocked a gateway to another dimension. So that is the plot of Stranger Things. Now, it sounds crazy that could be based on real events, right?
Sure.
But there's this filmmaker called Christopher Garetano, and he's investigating what started out as urban legends about a place called Camp Hero in Montauk in New York. So apparently Camp Hero is a former Cold War radar station. And it was shut down in the 1980s. And it's reported that when it was shut down, the locals all started hearing stories about government scientists who'd been drugging and experimenting on snatched foster kids and also street kids since the 1970s. Again, the 70s, the Wild West of fucking no ethics.
It all
happens in the 70s. The kids were experimented on and used for like mind control experiments, time travel experiments, teleportation experiments, controlling black holes, psychotronics where you use your mind to control devices, and even they were used to make contact with aliens. Now, of course, the US government has denied the existence of this secret lab or bunker under Camp Hero where all of these experiments allegedly were meant to have taken place.
It sounds like Hillary's basement in Comet Ping Pong Pizza,
It really does sound a bit like Comet Ping Pong. But Christopher Garetano, the filmmaker, he reckons he's found geophysical proof that there is a huge underground structure under that military base. And he says that up to 100,000 children could have been kidnapped for these secret experiments in this underground lab.
That's a lot.
And I'll get onto that in a minute. But he reckons he's actually spoken to survivors who were kidnapped when they were kids and they were experimented on. I actually did read this other story. Just to let you know, both of these stories are from The Sun, so make of that what you will.
Sometimes there's a grain of truth there.
It's not The Star, and it's not what the Daily Star.
It's not pure fantasy.
No. And there was a guy who is in his 50s from New York who didn't want to be named. He wanted his anonymity. So he's nameless in this article, who said he'd been abducted as a kid and held captive as part of a secret government experiment called the Montauk Project, where they were conducting experiments on kids to test mind control and psychological warfare theories. And he reckons he was abducted for different periods of time in 1980 and 1981. And he says he was taken to an underground lab beneath Camp Hero, where he was tested on against his will. He reckons he was about 12 or 13 at the time, or between those two ages. He's now in his mid-50s.
Fucking hell. Bloody hell.
And he reckons he only remembered any of this from recovered memories while he was under hypnosis in 2018. So I'm just going to read a few words that he has to say on this. And these are his words. He said, "We were riding around Montauk on bikes. We had this little BMX gang. This kid I'd seen around before, who was a bit of a loner, talked me into riding my bike with him to the Montauk base. Then, these are my words. From there, apparently they went through security gates, and the guy and his friend were greeted by two men in dark suits. And they were told, hey, there's really cool stuff inside. Come inside the base. You know, come in and check it out.
Stranger danger.
So they did. They were led down a dark path to an entryway where they then continued down a pitch black tunnel, and eventually they came to this sunken house with a collapsed roof. Don't even know what that means. But he says, and these are his words, I don't know how deep it went, but I remember going down to the second level and then just blacking out. I don't ever remember leaving.
How long was he there?
He was there on and off different periods.
So he kept going back?
Apparently. Because they were abducting.
But he doesn't have any actual memory of it, only a recovered memory.
Yes. Yes. Now, Geordie's giving me the face here.
A quizzical look
Yes.
coming your way, Michelle.
Well, just hold on to that quizzical look because it gets quite crazier. Because look, if this actually was true, surely his parents would have alerted the police at the time. A search would have been made for a missing kid. And I'm just saying that, you know, if this was a book, I would flag this as a plot hole. But moving right along.
Plot hole or bullshit.
Bullshit. The dude goes on to say that while he was under hypnosis, he remembered being in different rooms inside the underground bunker, including being naked and strapped to a table with wires attached to his head and body.
Yuck.
And he remembers there were other kids being experimented on as well. And these are his words. He said, we were being held in a concrete room beneath the camp's radar tower. There were around 70 other children in the room. We were all dressed in the same clothing. I don't remember leaving that room either. So I think that they were either drugging us or using gas on us to either make us not remember or pass out. He says, and these are his words, they were using our energy and trying to figure out if something was going on with us. The group I was with was all boys and we were taken against our will. I think that they had machines that were manipulating time. It was either time or dimensions. It was not normal stuff that they were doing. It wasn't like they were testing us with drugs to see if we got tuberculosis or something like that. He also said, and look, this actually kind of reminds me a little bit of John Ronson's Men Who Stare at Goats, which if you don't know about that book or you haven't read it, it's a non-fiction book about the US Army conducting mind control experiments where soldiers would try to stop a goat's heart and kill it just by staring at it. So, you know, the US government were doing mind control experiments. That has been documented.
Oh, yes, they were.
They really were. So this unidentified dude says again that while under hypnosis, he and other boys who were in the bunker were handed guns and told to kill a row of people in front of them. But they were facing away from them, so they only saw the back of their head. And he says, I remember shooting all these people in the back of their heads, but we never looked at their faces. And he says, I think the point of that test was to see if we had the capability to actually kill a living human. But there was no blood anywhere. And I realized under hypnosis that they were actually mannequins.
Okay.
So circling back to Christopher Garetano, he says he's spoken to loads of witnesses who all claimed they were experimented on, and they were all runaways or vulnerable kids who were lured in or abducted and basically used as guinea pigs. And he says that thousands of kids were murdered and dumped after they'd been experimented on, and that there might have been links to organised crime related to the Montauk Project. And these are his words. He says, I've heard about children being kidnapped and murdered from every single one of the people I've spoken to about this. And look, when I was thinking about this, it seemed unbelievable to me that thousands of kids could just go missing. And like I said, you know, Christopher Garetano reckons there were over 100,000 people or kids experimented on during 13 years during the 70s and 1980s. And that's a lot of people. So I did a quick search for how many people go missing every year in the United States.
This is what I was going to say next, Michelle. It is a lot, but actually I think, you know, that kids just do go missing. And there are, if you look at each state in the United States, for example, it would end up being a lot.
Well, that's the thing.
So tell us, what did you find out?
Well, I went to the government stats from the FBI actual website. 2019 missing person and unidentified persons statistics report said that as of December 31, 2019, there were almost 87,500 active missing person records for that year.
Wow.
Of which 35% were under the age of 18 and 44% in total were under 21, which seems kind of low figure considering that the population of America in 2019 was just a smidge under 330 million. However, there were 609,000 people reported missing, but 607,000 of those reports were cancelled. So I'm not good at maths, but I think there's around, give or take, 100,000 people that are on the books, but they're not actively missing from that year.
Okay.
We're looking at probably closer to 200,000 people a year actively missing in the United States. And when you put that into the context of 1980, when there was 100 million people less in the United States, it is possible to have 100,000 kids experimented on over a 13-year period, right? Back then, too, there was no internet, no CCTV, no joined up systems for reporting or locating missing people. So I think it's probably would have been a lot easier back then for people just to disappear. I mean, we talked about Connie Converse, you know, she just went missing in the 70s. And I think people were just more accepting of it. They're like, yeah, she went to another state. We never heard from her again. So I think it is possible. And look, if they were troubled teens, they were runaways, you know, they were kids who got messed up with gangs or drugs or prostitution, they're the kids that were being targeted, according to this Christopher Garetano. Right. So who knows? And look, to be fair, Christopher Garetano says he doesn't know either. And he says he has no evidence for anything other than anecdotal reports from people who say this stuff happened to them. But he truly believes that something happened out there. And you know how I mentioned before that he says there were links to organised crime?
Yes.
He says he spoke to a guy who, again, did not want his real name used because they never do. So he's using the pseudonym called James Bruce. And he says he was taken into the underground lab. He was injected. He was subjected to mind control experiments. And he reckons kids were murdered and their bodies were disposed of through organised crime mobs. And that he reckons someone in his own family was involved with that body disposal. Which,
oh my God.
Yeah, which sounds crazy. But Christopher Garetano says this guy, when he was telling him this information, seemed really genuine when he was talking about it. And that this guy was one of those kids who was in trouble a lot with the law as a kid. And that the story did not seem rehearsed. And he wasn't making any money off this story by telling it. So I don't know.
when you're telling me the story about organized crime guys, and they do certainly know how to dispose of a body.
They do.
But I also imagine, I'm thinking of Al Pacino and Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci right now, all psychopaths when they're playing the mob guys, Italian Americans. I have an issue with them disposing of children's bodies or murdering children or having anything to do with children. I don't think the Italian mafia would get their hands in that kind of business. Look, I might be wrong. I don't know. I just imagine they're family guys. I'm a family guy.
Well, look, it might not necessarily have been the mob, but yes, I see what you're saying. Anybody who potentially has to dispose of a child or a teen's body, you know, like, yeah, it's gonna haunt you. You would imagine, but. Yeah. I'm just relaying the story. I don't know. So,
well, this is an interesting story.
Yeah.
And what else do you know, Mish?
So he also said, Christopher Garetano also said, he went to Camp Hero to do some geophysical tests on the area to see if there really could be some kind of secret lab under the ground. And he reckons the officials guarding the disused base, and there are apparently officials guarding this disused base.
Right.
He reckons every time he went there, the officials would freak out and they would not let him near certain areas. And these are his words. He said, "We brought in geophysical equipment, which specifically is called electric resistivity or electronic resistivity imagery." Neil, scientist, help me out here.
Wow, that's tricky.
It is. And he said they gave him really good readings. And he said it gave us a vertical slice of information that proved there was an enormous man-made structure underground that's not officially supposed to be there. And and he says every single government official denies that there are any man-made structures there except for a couple of access tunnels that were filled in. Well, this wasn't an access tunnel. There was something much larger that was being described by the men who claimed they were part of the experiment. Now, there was also apparently a chair that one alleged survivor called Preston Nichols described as a mind-reading chair, where kids were made to sit in this chair and then they had energy waves like beamed at them. They were hammered with these energy waves to see if there was any psychic change or any kind of psychotronic ability. Now, psychotronic, remember, is where you can move. You can alter devices with your mind. And apparently it was discovered while kids were in this chair that if you had any kind of psychic ability, there was some kind of activity. And if the subject focused really hard on something in their mind, it could momentarily physically materialize. This is I know. This is where it gets a bit too much for me.
Woo.
But a bit woo-woo. And this is where Preston Nichols sort of lost me, because he's saying basically they were able to take things from a subject's imagination and make it real. And this is where Stranger Things comes in, because Preston Nichols reckons apparently a monster was once materialized from a kid's mind and it went on a rampage through the airbase. Which, to me, again, I gotta call bullshit on that. But if all of this really did happen and kids did go missing and they were experimented on and little wormholes opened up in space and time travel portals were, sucking people in and putting them into different times and places and monsters were being conjured, well, it's fucking terrifying.
Absolutely it is. If a kid can just imagine something and there it is in front of you going nuts.
I know.
I kind of want that to happen.
But if it's not true, then I think the producers have made a really great TV series.
Absolutely.
And that is the origin story of Stranger Things, apparently.
Amazing, Michelle. What a lot of shit.
Do you know what, though? I think there are elements in that which could have some kind of basis in fact, because we do know that the US government did conduct a lot of mind control experiments over many decades.
Absolutely.
You know,
I know all about that, Michelle, because I've just done my research on MK Ultra.
That's a CIA mind control, isn't it?
CIA mind control. So while you were telling me that story, I was thinking a lot about, yes, there are mind control experiments, and they've been going on for years, decades.
Yeah.
And they have been proven to be true and real. And I'm going to tell you all about it right now.
I can't wait because I know only the haziest little hint about MK Ultra.
Well,
it does sound like a gun. Like it sounds like an
MK
Uzi
Ultra.
to me. It's like, pass me the MK Ultra.
It sounds like a hair dye to me.
I wish.
I
would love an MK Ultra because I'm getting some greys that are getting hard to cover.
Like mahogany
MK
K extra ultra. Anyway, okay, cast your minds back, if you are old enough, to the Cold War, and the CIA became convinced that communists had discovered a drug or a technique that would allow them to control human minds, so they devised their own version. So Project MK Ultra was born. This is the code name for an illegal CIA program, which began in the 50s, where human experimentation took place on innocent people in a bid to discover how drugs like LSD could be used in interrogation, brainwashing, and psychological torture, methods which are still used to this day.
Oh, dear.
So this project was overseen and created by a chemist called Sidney Gottlieb, and the methods used were things like giving unsuspecting test subjects high doses of psychoactive drugs such as LSD, mescaline, things like that, and other chemicals, God knows what, electroshock, which we know has been used for a long time in curing mental health disorders, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, going back to 11 in Stranger Things, when she had to conjure things, she would be in a little flotation tank, wouldn't she? Isolation, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, and many other forms of torture.
Wow. Well, that doesn't sound like much fun.
It's not really a lot of fun.
But can you imagine, being given like high levels of LSD? Your brain is fucked. Your brain would be completely
and not knowing.
fucked. And not knowing what was
not
going on.
being aware that you're on a crazy trip. Yeah.
You've lost your mind because
Yeah,
even when you know you've dropped something, you feel like you've lost your mind. And small levels, Well,
anyway, these MK Ultra experiments were carried out under the guise of research in more than 80 institutions across the US, including colleges, universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies, all on unwilling and unaware members of the public. And this was all done hush-hush by the CIA in highly illegal breaches in human rights.
Of course. We just talked about this.
Exactly.
No ethics. And I say the 70s was the Wild West of zero ethics.
Absolutely.
Well, 50s, 60s, anything before the 70s as well.
It's even worse.
It is even worse. And I wonder if these people were, like we just talked about with the Montauk Project, if they were snatched or abducted.
Well, let me tell you.
Yeah, tell me.
Journalist Stephen Kinzer, who wrote the book Poisoner in Chief, spent several years investigating the program and calls the operation the most sustained search in history for techniques of mind control.
Right.
So even more than the Montauk Project.
Yeah.
If that was even true. It was a continuation of World War II Japanese and Nazi concentration camps. So in those camps, Nazi doctors at, say, for example, Dachau concentration camp would use mescaline on prisoners, which inspired the CIA. And Kinzer said that the CIA secretly recruited Nazi torturers and vivisectionists to continue their work on thousands of subjects and were brought to a place called Fort Detrick, which is in Maryland in the United States, to instruct CIA officers on how long it took people to die from sarin. You remember sarin? That's the nerve agent which was developed in 1938 in Germany as a pesticide, and it's man-made toxin. It was used in 2 terrorist attacks in Japan in 1994 and 1995. That's another story. We'll talk about that another time.
But can you imagine sitting around, being a government scientist, sitting around going, right, how are we going to get ahead of the Russians? Let's just, inject people with drugs.
This far. Exactly. We suspect they're doing this, so let's go nuts.
It sounds horrifying. And how do you live with yourself?
Who knows?
Sorry, continue with your great story.
Thank you. In 1953, American bacteriologist, biological warfare scientist, and an employee of the United States Army Biological Warfare Laboratories, sorry about that mouthful, but you need to take this all in. His name was Frank Olson. He's the guy I've just been talking about. He's an employee. He worked at Camp Detrick. He attended a meeting one day at a retreat in rural Maryland with various other colleagues and CIA operatives when he and other participants were covertly, now I believe this means that they were aware of it, dosed with LSD by their colleague Sidney Gottlieb, but they weren't told it was LSD, they were told it was a potential truth serum and they were being experimented on with this truth serum, right?
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but that's horrible.
It's not a funny story.
Take a truth serum.
When Olson returned home to his family the next day, he seemed different. He refused to eat, seemed distant, and wouldn't attend to his children. At one point, he told his wife, "I've made a terrible mistake." MK Ultra had been operating for about 7 months at this time, and barely 24 men knew the true nature and the intentions of the project. I should point out, actually, that I got a lot of this information from a CBC? I can't remember. The Fifth Estate, it's called. It's a Canadian podcast called Brainwashed. And I'd listened to this about a year ago. So I knew a lot of this stuff and I've been dying to talk about it. So anyway, some days later, Frank Olson and his boss, Lieutenant Colonel Vincent Rouet, arrived at work at Detrick, both still in bad shape from the retreat where they were dosed, right? Rouet later recalled that Frank appeared to be agitated and asked Rouet if Rouet should fire him or if he should quit. So he was all over the shop. Rouet managed to calm him for the duration of the day, but the next day, Olson came to work again, even worse. And Rouet said that Olson was disoriented, he felt all mixed up about the work he had been doing, and he felt incompetent. So 9 days later, after this potential truth serum had been administered, Frank Olson went to New York with a colleague called Robert Lashbrook. During the night, Olson fell to his death from a window in the Hotel Statler in New York. The night manager on duty at the time rushed over to Olson, who was still alive. And apparently, the night manager says that Olson tried to speak to him, but he died before medical help arrived. Years later,
Oh, God.
I know, terrible. Years later, the night manager recalled, "I've never encountered a case where someone got up in the middle of the night, ran across a dark room in his underwear, avoiding 2 beds, and dove through a closed window with the shade and curtains drawn." So it's a bit fishy.
He obviously was given like massively high dose of LSD. He told his wife, "I've made a mistake."
Yep.
Like his brain was never coming back.
He was losing it, absolutely. But also he seemed to be a bit of a liability, I think. So the US government, of course, described his death as a suicide, then misadventure, but others allege it was murder. And it was thought that he was chosen as this subject because he was suspected of being a security risk, or was he disposed of because he was suspected? You can find out by watching a series on Netflix called Wormwood, starring Peter Sarsgaard. So you can go and watch that and find out more. So going back to this journalist Kinser, who wrote the book Poisoner in Chief, he says Gottlieb wanted to create a way to seize control of people's minds, and he realized it was a 2-part process. First, you had to blast away the existing mind. Second, you had to find a way to insert a new mind into that resulting void. We didn't get that far on number 2, but we did a lot of work on number 1.
Oh. So what, they just blasted away the old mind, left you with nothing?
Nothing.
Nothing
exactly.
inside.
A void. Yeah.
Empty in the coconut.
So due to the top secret aspects of the case, it's difficult to establish the cost of the human lives that were involved. And it's unknown how many deaths occurred directly as a result, but lives were definitely ruined. So going back to my CBC podcast, Brainwashed, there's another story on there. There's a man in his 60s called Lloyd Schreier, and he tells the story of his mother, Esther, who was a patient in Montreal's Allen Memorial Institute in the 1960s. Now, Esther had gone there to seek treatment for what would now be described as anxiety or postnatal depression, right? And she was pregnant with Lloyd at the time. There's a man there called Dr. Ewan Cameron. He was the director of the hospital of the time. Now, he's a Scottish-born American psychiatrist, well regarded, with a reputation that had caught the attention of the US government after he evaluated Rudolf Hess at the Nuremberg trials. He's a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
So as part of MK Ultra, the CIA were interested in his psychiatric research that involved extreme sensory deprivation, drugs, and an intense repetition of recorded messages. That was his style. CIA found out. They hooked him on board. So the moment that poor old Esther Schreier entered that hospital, her well-being and that of her unborn child were totally disregarded. She spent 30 days in what was called the sleep room, which is a place where patients were put in a drug-induced coma and roused only for 3 feedings and bathroom breaks per day. She lost 5 kilos that month, pregnant. Her records show she couldn't stand up because she was too weak.
Oh, my God.
Then Esther went through something called repatterning, which was something that what happens there is when they break down the patient's mind to something like a childlike state through drugs and electroshock therapy to allow Dr. Cameron to work from a clean slate, going back to the wiping the mind, wiping the ego. Then
Fuck, this sounds terrifying.
It's terrifying. And then Cameron could then reprogram the patients. And part of his reprogramming regime would involve playing recorded messages to the patients for up to 20 hours a day, whether they were asleep or awake. They were just having these voices played through headphones or helmets or speakers. Sometimes they were put inside the patient's pillow. And records show that some patients would hear these messages up to 500,000 times.
But I wonder what they were saying.
I don't know. By March 1960, Esther Schreier's medical records state that she was considered completely depatterned. She was incontinent, mute, and had trouble swallowing.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. She went in there with depression and came out fucked, a vegetable.
Like a newborn baby. She developed a gynecological symptom when she was in there and started to bleed, and she was late on in her pregnancy. So at this point, they brought the obstetrician in to treat her, and then they would let her rest for 4 or 5 days. Then they would resume treatments. And Cameron's notes say that on August 17, 1960, 6 months after she entered the hospital, she had 29 electroshock treatments, with most of them of the extreme variety that he was using. But because she was now in her 8th month of pregnancy, the treatment stopped and she was sent home.
As a complete fucking vegetable.
As a vegetable.
So where's the husband? Why is the husband not intervening, going, what the hell are you doing to my wife?
Well, because they thought that she was being looked after. They weren't aware of what was going on to her.
Yeah, of course.
But by the time Lloyd was born in September, Esther didn't know how to look after him. She didn't recognize her husband, Michelle. She had to relearn everything, including how to boil water.
Oh, God.
But 20 years after the experiments were first publicly exposed, in 1994, the Canadian government offered compensation for people who were experimented on by Cameron from 1950 to 1965. So he was doing these experiments pre-MK Ultra.
And obviously, the government put their hand up and said, yeah, this was fucked. We're going to give you some money.
Yeah, absolutely.
Terrible.
And some people believe that Cameron started his experiments in the late 1940s. The patients had to prove that they had experienced full or substantial depatterning to be eligible. So going back to Gottlieb, so that's just that story about the Canadians. There's a lot of them, a lot of witness statements as well on the podcast and on the news programs, because it's been proven, and obviously they got compensated. It happened. Now, going back to Sidney Gottlieb, who is the godfather of the MK Ultra project, in a way, he was more influential to counterculture than Timothy Leary and that lot, because in the 1950s, he arranged for the CIA to pay $240,000 to buy the world's entire supply of LSD.
What?
Give it to me, all of it. All of it. I want all the acid. So there were willing participants of the experiments. Guess who they were, Michelle? Ken Kesey, the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest, who got his LSD in an experiment through MK Ultra, as did Robert Hunter, who's the lyricist for the Grateful Dead, and poet Allen Ginsberg. They all had a pop at being deprogrammed through LSD, but they thought it was fantastic. They fucking loved it. They were thrilled with the results. They told their friends and anyone who'd listen to tune in and drop out. And these great mind-expanding qualities through acid. So that would bite the CIA in the bum, because then the counterculture revolution took off, and what followed was all this derailing of their, the moral America that they were trying to build.
Yeah, of course. It just turned into hippie free-for-all. Like, everyone's on acid and loving it.
Going nuts. So there's also crime boss Whitey Bulger, who I don't know very much about. I'd like to find out more about him. Do you know about this guy?
We have, I think, mentioned
I feel like
Whitey
his name's
Bulger.
been mentioned.
Yeah, we have. Don't ask me why or how, because I have no memory. But yeah, we've talked about Whitey Bulger, I'm sure.
So he was one of the prisoners who also volunteered to help with the research. And he was told it was research to find a cure for schizophrenia. And so he was given LSD every day for more than a year. But he later realised that he'd been duped, and this was an experiment into how to get a person to lose their marbles. He wasn't very happy, Michelle. He later wrote about his horrific experiences. He said, "I was in prison for committing a crime, but they committed a greater crime on me." He was furious.
And he's absolutely fucking right.
Yeah.
You know?
CIA officers in Europe and Asia were capturing enemy agents and other people deemed expendable. So now the reach is beyond the United States. Now we're in Europe. Now we're in Asia. Just any kind of espionage or any kind of underbelly kind of criminal character that they could find, they would grab off the streets, they would throw them in cells, and they would start testing alongside intense questioning to see if they could break their resolve and destroy the humanity within them. So these projects were designed not only to understand the human mind, but also to work out how to destroy it. And Gottlieb, with support from the CIA, who, by the way, the CIA did not oversee these experiments. They just allowed them to carry on, closed eyes, turned backs, just allowed him to go around killing and ruining lives across the US, Canada, Europe, Asia, without impunity. He was just free to go nuts and do his experiments.
Which is basically giving the green light, let's face it.
It is.
They may not have supported and controlled directly, but they definitely
they wanted the
enabled.
info.
Yeah.
And you'll see it referenced heavily in modern cinema. Now, there's aspects of the MK Ultra in Stranger Things. I thought that when I watched it the first time. Also, we just recently watched the remake of the Ipcress File, heavily about MK Ultra.
Yeah.
So what they're talking about in the Ipcress File is projects like Project Artichoke and Bluebird, which ran from 1953 to 1973 with the collaboration of the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence and the United States Army Biological Warfare Laboratories. Project Artichoke's primary goal was to determine whether a person could be involuntarily made to perform an act of attempted assassination.
Right.
And that's what was going on in the Ipcress File. Not to give any spoilers.
Well, there's also the Philadelphia experiment as well.
Yeah.
Which is where the US military is meant to have conducted secret tests in Philadelphia in a shipping yard to try and foil Nazi radars so they could get goods to their allies in Europe without being detected. And it was also mind control stuff as well. So, there have been things throughout history where the US government has been doing dodgy shit, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. There's no doubt about that, because by the end of it, these experiments ceased in 1973 when the director of the CIA and Gottlieb's boss, Richard Helms, was removed by President Nixon. The two men then decided to wipe all the evidence of MK Ultra, the projects that had been going on under Sidney Gottlieb's tenure, although there were some records found at a depot for expense accounts reports and various other pieces of paper. So there was enough there for officials to reconstruct some of what had happened. So in the end, that's how they were able to then start something in 1976, which is called the Church Committee, which is chaired by Idaho Senator Frank Church. And this was created as part of a series of investigations into intelligence abuses in what was called the Year of Intelligence. So not only did they uncover that in the report, in the Church Committee report, not only did they uncover MK Ultra, they also found something called COINTELPRO, which involved the surveillance and infiltration of American political and civil rights organization, including attempts on Martin Luther King's life by the CIA and by the government. Then there was something called Family Jewels, which is another CIA program to covertly assassinate foreign leaders. This shit was going on, and they found out about it, and it is now in public records, yet people still trust the CIA. I can't understand it. Operation Mockingbird is also a systematic propaganda campaign with domestic and foreign journalists operating as CIA assets, and dozens of US news organizations providing cover for CIA activity. What a shadowy little organization the CIA are.
Really? And they've got, dodgy little fingers in all sorts of pies.
As Snowden can tell you. And then there's Project Shamrock, in which the major telecommunication companies shared their traffic with the NSA, which is the National Security something. NSA, what's that stand for again? I can't remember. Association, thank you. So I'm just going to end with Dr. Ewan Cameron's legacy, which was felt at none other than Guantanamo Bay on suspected terrorists and Al-Qaeda suspects who were mentally broken and tortured using the same techniques pioneered by this lovely Scottish doctor. So it didn't end in 1976. It carried on. They still use the techniques to this day, probably in loads of different places underground, which we don't know about. Horrific.
God, that's just terrifying. But I mean, do you remember that when Guantanamo was happening, people were shocked and horrified by the torture
treatment.
tools that were being used?
Yeah, stress positions and waterboarding and isolation. Sound babies
torture.
Crying. Yeah, bullets, like tapes of bullets going off nearby and women screaming and babies crying.
Absolutely horrific. But look, all of this stuff, look, you go online, you just type in the most simplest of searches, and there is so much on all of this stuff. Like I said at the top of my story, let's be clear, this is a conspiracy theory. But what are the grains of truth in all of these? Well, yeah, yours isn't. And, actually, when I was just mentioning about the Philadelphia experiment, I forgot the main thing, which is, yes, they were trying to use trick the Nazis with these radars. Yeah. But apparently, and I think actually, is there a Tom Hanks movie?
Philadelphia. No, that's about AIDS, isn't it? Wasn't he like...
Oh, yeah, maybe you're right. Oh, yeah, maybe it's a completely different thing. Yeah. Philadelphia something, not that one.
No.
But the part of this Philadelphia experiment is that, yes, they were trying to knock out Nazi radar vibes, whatever. But apparently they reckon they accidentally caused a battleship to travel into a different dimension through time.
What?
Yeah. And there was a story about this made in 1984. I'm going to have to look up what it was. And, they're saying that, is it real? Is it folklore? I mean, again, conspiracy theories, stories, who really knows? But there is so much about the Americans just experimenting on its own citizens to try and get ahead, get a military leg up. And, this goes back also to what we were talking about just a few weeks ago with the aliens and all of the UAP investigations and the new government bodies. It's all to do with not protecting human life, but about military advantage. So
absolutely, yeah.
What they get away with in the name of military advantage it's scary. But are they getting away with it? I don't know.
Let's hope not.
No.
Let's hope that more church committees happen and we find out more about what's been going on and we can put an end to it. You know what I say, Michelle? Everybody just live and let live. For God's sake, just get on with it. You don't need to keep trying to get leg over, getting a one up on other countries and spying and all that. Just have a nice time, guys. We're on a nice planet.
Do you know what, Geordie?
Chill out.
I do think getting a leg over actually means something different.
I realised that once I said it. I apologise. Everybody just get your legs over and forget about war, for God's sake.
Do you know what? The world would actually be a better place if everyone did just get a leg over more often. There'd be lots of happy people enjoying watermelon sugar.
As long as it's consensual, Michelle. As long as it's consensual. Let's just make sure that caveat is in place. But listen, I think we have come to the end of our chit-chat today, my love.
Thank you so much for that incredible story. Yeah, I really loved it.
That's my pleasure. Thank you for yours and your update on Lynette Dawson. But I just want to remind everybody that we do actually have a way that you can support us. If you're loving what you're listening to, if you want us to have more time and more money to spend on making things better, go over to our Patreon page, which is www.patreon.com/I don't fucking know.
Patreon Eavesdroppin, Nochi. You'll find us.
You'll find us.
And we've got links on the website as well.
On the website. Over there, you can pledge money per month and get extra things and lovely, yummy stuff that we're coming up with all the time. And not only extra content, but also merchandise in the near future. But also, you can just give us a tip because you like us. Why don't you do that? I mean, it'd be a nice thing to do, wouldn't it?
I mean, look, I give tips all the time. I give tips
tip.
to waiters.
Thank you for your service. Here's a tip.
Yeah, I throw a coin in a hat for people who are doing good music on the street. You know, chuck us a tip. We'll
be very grateful.
We're very happy for anything. But, you know, I do think also, Geordie, it does bring us to that point in the show where we say, wherever you are,
whatever you do, just keep eavesdropping.
Eavesdropping, eavesdropping, dropping, eavesdropping, dropping, eavesdropping, eavesdropping, dropping, dropping, eavesdropping.